My name is Dow Scott, and I'm a human resources professor at the Quinlan School of Business. And I'm delighted to host HR's February Insights program, what the CEO demands from human resources. HR Insights focus upon provocative and timely issues relevant to the HR professional community. We have two more exciting ones coming up. The first in March, on the first Wednesday of March, with Peter Norlander hosting The Great Resignation, the role of job quality and labor relations. And then the first Wednesday in April, which is April 6th, Professor Arup Barma is going to host Reimagining Expatriation, International Assignments in the COVID Era. So both should be great programs. I'd like to take this opportunity to recognize our two staff members that are helping us today, Alyssa Davis and Jennifer Fernandez. Thank you for helping us. First, a couple rules. Please close your cameras and mute your microphones. We are recording this session, and so you'll be using chat for the questions, and I'm sure folks are going to have some great questions as we get started. It takes me great pleasure to introduce our two panel members. First, Jennifer Scanlon, President and CEO of UL, which is Underwriters Laboratories. Jennifer works to advance UL's scientific, safety, science, and regulatory leadership with the ambition of serving as its customers' most trusted safety, security, and sustainability partner. Prior to UL, Jennifer was president and CEO of USG Corporation, where she also served in various executive and leadership roles, including Chief Information Officer. She led the company through major international expansion, digital transformation, sustainable evolution, and enhancing its ability to meet customer needs. Jennifer's deep commitment to science, technology, engineering, and math shape her approach to innovation. She is a fierce advocate for STEM education and the benefits of diversity and inclusion. She's a director of the Norfolk Southern Corporation. She serves as a board of trustees at Notre Dame and chair of the Commercial Club of Chicago and vice chair of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Thank you for joining us. We also have with us Brian Cook, is an executive advisor with Challenger Gray and Christmas, a Chicago-based global career transition firm. He's also an adjunct professor in the MBA program at Loyola's Quinlan School of Business. He teaches classes in motivating and managing the workplace. Brian recently retired as an executive vice president and chief administrative officer of USG Corporation, a manufacturer and distributor of high-performance building systems through its subsidiaries, US Gypsum Company, USG Interiors, and USG International. Brian was responsible for the human resources, corporate communications, corporate services, and environmental and health safety functions. Okay. So I would like to begin by asking Jenny to talk a little bit about her vision of the role of the CHRO and what she needs from that role. And then we'll ask Brian to also offer an introductory statement from the CHRO's perspective. Please submit your questions as you think about them through the chat function so that we can get those questions to our panel members. Jenny?
Terrific. And I'm realizing, can you hear me okay? Because I'm realizing I may not have the right speaker working, but I'm going to work on that. But let me open up by saying, first of all, as now a second time CEO of a large, international, this time global company, I will tell you, my most important right-hand person is my head of HR. And when I got the call from the board of directors at USG, informing me that I was their selection to be the next CEO upon my predecessor's retirement, the very first phone call I made was to Brian Cook. That's how important I view this role. And I had been fortunate. I had worked at USG for 14 years before being named a CEO. And I will say Brian taught me almost everything I know about HR, and probably the other things that I know were probably not the good things. So Brian taught me all the good things. When I joined UL, our CHRO was also nearing retirement. So I had an opportunity to shape that role kind of in my vision. And so based on my experiences at USG, and I do also see another one of my HR partners from USG on the call, Shelley Green, and I have to give her a bit of a shout out because she taught me a lot about HR also. But I'll tell you the four things that for me really mattered in having a CHRO as a partner. And the first one is that word partner. And that partnership comes from having a depth of perspective and understanding of HR expertise and business context. And that when you have that combination of somebody leading the HR function who isn't just saying, oh, hey, here's the market median for compensation, or here's the, let's play it up the middle of the road on, our budgets for training and development, but instead digging in and saying, what makes us unique as a company? And what are those business drivers? And then how do we deploy those HR, that tool set to furthering those distinctions and not just making it kind of a run-of-the-mill type of response or answer. So that's one, is that partnership and that depth of business understanding paired with that depth of HR expertise. The second thing, and this was something extremely important at USG and probably the reason, well, it is the reason why I joined UL, the global safety science leader, is a focus on employee health and safety, and most importantly, safety. At USG, we had been named America's safest company when I was there, and we also won the Campbell Award, which is the National Safety Council award given to really the best, industrial environment for safety. It's no accident to win that award. It is years, decades of hard work to make sure that every single employee rolls out of bed every day thinking about, how do I go home in as good or better condition than when I came to work, and how do I keep the people around me safe? So when I was looking for a new head of HR, new CHRO at UL, that was top of my list. We are a leader in safety science, but yet you can never rest on your laurels, and you cannot fall down on keeping your employees safe every single day. And that was a really important, probably the most important core value that I learned from my time with Brian, and how hard that is to do and how important it is. The third thing is that focus on employee talent and development, and having a context for what's the right way to build succession plans, to develop your teams, and to keep that front of mind, both for the board of directors as well as for the entire executive team, and then trickling that down into the organization. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that. And then the final fourth characteristic for me, the CHRO, it has to be somebody, that I trust implicitly and that I view as an advisor, and that I enjoy walking into their office. And in the way our offices were laid out at USG, and even the way they are here at UL, I walk past the CHRO's office on the way to my office. And I can't tell you how many mornings I haven't even made it to my office, that something's on my mind where I need that trusted advisor. And I plop myself down in Brian's chair or Linda's chair, who's my current CHRO, throw my coat on the side, and start, asking questions and then listening to their advice. So that's how I view the role of the CHRO.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Brian.
Sure. Well, first, Jenny, thank you for those kind comments. Hello, everyone. I think I'll be brief because I don't want to be redundant with what Jenny said, and I think you'll see that we have sort of a common view on what makes someone successful in HR. I broke it down into 5 buckets. One is obviously you have to be the thought leader in terms of HR and people. That's probably the easiest part. Most people can get experience in HR and understand how HR works and what the tools are. The second thing, and Jenny alluded to this, is being a savvy business person. When you're head of HR, you don't put in programs just because you're chasing the latest fad. What you're doing is using HR tools to solve business problems. And, I would often tell people that the test of a good HR leader is not if you're asked your opinion on HR stuff, you're supposed to be, but does anyone ask your opinion on the business? The third thing is I think you got to be value centered. You have to anchor what you do and the decisions you make in your value system. And you're also, I think, the custodian to some extent of the organization's values. If there's one person in the organization that should be sort of that the CEO can rely on to make sure that the organization is following its values, to me, that's the HR person. The fourth thing is obviously being a champion for people at all levels of the organization. It's easy when you're in the executive suite to help and answer requests of the other senior people. They're the most visible, they have the most power. But if you're head of HR, you need to be as concerned with the person working on the shop floor as the person working next to you. And then the last one, if you do those things well, then you can be an advisor for the CEO. And I think the HR role is unique or should be unique in that you're not competing with other senior people. You shouldn't have a personal agenda. Your agenda is what's best for the company. And you should be able to give the CEO candid, thoughtful advice, and sometimes even delivering news that's not good. Often executives don't want to give bad news to their boss, but the HR person has to be the one that's always willing to sort of speak truth. So to me, that's sort of how I bucketed the key skills. I think the other thing that makes an HR person very successful is work for a good CEO. And I was very fortunate to work for Jenny and some other people that were just very talented and very as concerned with the people in the organization as they were with the bottom line.
Okay. Thank you very much. I will remind everyone to please put your questions into chat. But I'm going to take my role and prerogative to ask the first question to get things started. Jenny, you did talk about hiring, having the opportunity to hire a HRs. Can you tell us a little bit about that process and how if that was challenging, or are there lots of talent out there? What's the word on that?
It's such an important process, and especially I was pretty much a brand new CEO at UL. So brand new company, new to the role, didn't have a good really finger on the pulse yet of the culture or on, we were in the early stages of refining our strategy and our aspirations. So it was really important to me to find a good executive search firm who could cast a pretty wide net. And the one I chose, I had experience with. They, and I always say, when you go with executive search, you've got to go with the partner. Every single firm out there has good people and good processes, but it's the partner who leads that search who becomes the most important element of it. And given so many things were so new to me at UL, I chose a partner with whom I had worked before. She had done a number of searches for us at USG. She had actually also, as I had been out departing USG and looking for a new role, she and I had stayed in contact. And so she really understood the way I thought about things. And that made it a lot easier because there were so many other variables that were unknown. It was good to have at least one known in there. The market was good. This was right at the beginning of COVID. Unfortunately, when we launched the search and wrote the spec, I thought that COVID was going to be a 3-week problem for our couple thousand people who we have in China, and that we were going to get through the Lunar New Year and everybody was going to be back to work. Little did I think that this was going to turn into a 2-year Herculean effort for an HR department to lead, in addition to leading the rest of the business. So as it turned out, I had to do all my interviews over Zoom, and it was early days of Zoom, and it was pretty painful. I'm sure my camera was rocking back and forth and had different technical difficulties. It was really hard. But I decided one of the most important pieces as I got down to the final two candidates was meeting live despite the pandemic and making sure that I had that personal connection. So there was lots of talent out there, a number of people who could have been a really good fit for UL, but that final bit of feeling like they would be a trusted advisor, the only way I could get to that was having that personal interaction. And that's how I made my final selection.
Very good. Brian, what would you say are the characteristics of an outstanding CHRO person as you're thinking of this new market and, the way the world's unfolding under COVID?
Yeah, well, as I said earlier, there's a lot of people that are very talented in terms of HR. That's not really that hard to find. People who can combine that with a business experience. But I think, particularly in the last couple of years with COVID, the ability to communicate effectively, to manage change, to be flexible, to understand that there might be more than one way to achieve a business outcome, and to be able to translate business goals, business objectives, business challenges into HR programs and strategies. So I think it requires people being very nimble, on top of the sort of technical skills. I think today you need people who are very nimble, people who can work in, under a lot of pressure in fast-paced environments, and can manage change. And, obviously, all CHROs have been managing a lot of change in the last couple of years, everything from the medical and safety aspects of COVID to the where people are working and how they want to work. So to me, that may be, one of the most important dimensions, and it's got to fit well with the CEO, right? If there's not this relationship that's based on trust, the most talented person in the world won't be successful.
Yeah, I agree that change leadership role has really moved to the forefront, hasn't it, in terms of leadership at any level, really. Let's see, I'm looking for questions from our audience. Let me.
But, Dow, while you're waiting for a question, is one other thing that really speaks to the evolution of HR. There was a time when HR departments did a lot of transactional administrative work, and some of that still remains. But much of that today is done by technology. Much of that is outsourced. And so increasingly the core of HR is around things like performance management, change management, talent management. And I think that, the days of a successful HR executive relying on their ability to manage, vast amounts of processes around, insurance or payroll, whatever, it's just expected that that's done well. The value add today is really around organizational performance, talent management.
And I'll add in a couple thoughts around both that organizational performance and talent management. And, I alluded to it in my opening of the importance of succession planning. And as CEO, I believe, my major jobs are one, allocating capital appropriately, which is really making, it's just making decisions on where you're going to, focus people on time and resources and money. But the next thing is to make sure that my seat, my team's seats can be filled with a strong, robust, set of existing employees who are either ready now or within a few years of being ready to take on those roles. And that's something that it's an art and it's a science, but working through that, on a large scale in an organization, to me, when an HR team does that well, it's powerful, because it's powerful that you've gotten, it means that you've gotten the right training and development. It means that you've got the right type of open and honest dialogue going in amongst the management team to say, I think this person's ready now. And somebody else says, no, they haven't displayed this, or they're lacking in this type of, EQ, or they haven't, they've never held this type of job. Let's make sure we rotate them. So getting that right as the head of HR and having the team underneath you really facilitate consistent, I'm going to call it calibrated processes, so that this manager isn't telling everyone that they're awesome, and this manager isn't, telling everybody that they're C players and they should be looking for a new role, when indeed the truth on both teams is somewhere in the middle, is just a really important process. And Brian and team ran that extraordinarily well, and it made it easy as we stepped back and rotated people through the company to know that you had certainty that when you moved somebody that they were going to succeed in that role, and that you had a deep bench underneath you who could seize the day when they need to.
Well, I think underlying what you're saying is also that notion of fairness. I think today people are so sensitive to fairness, maybe they've always been, that you have to have some kind of system that basically validates fairness.
Yeah, and that fairness, I think it's even harder for people when everything's conducted over Zoom. That on one hand, it kind of levels the playing field because you've lost some of those personal connections, and on the other hand, it makes it worse because the snippets of time that you're seeing people, or the interaction that you have, is so limited compared to what I like to refer to, in real life. It's important to have that fair process there.
Now this question, I've got a question from one of our audience, and they want to know about the opportunities for development. What experiences does, I guess, someone that's preparing themselves to become a CHRO need to have, as they build toward that role? I think we have several new career HR folks that would be very interested in that. And I'll open that up to either one.
I'm going to let Brian answer that because he knows it better than I do.
Yeah. Certainly the opportunity to take a role in the business would be terrifically helpful if it's possible. It's not always possible, but HR people can get involved in business issues by volunteering, to be on a task force or a committee. And anything that you can do to demonstrate that you're building your skills as a business person, not just as an HR person, is helpful. HR people historically, whether this is true or not, were sort of famous for not having great financial skills. Maybe that's just an assumption that if you have good people skills, you don't have good technical skills. I don't know if that's true or not, but certainly, it's hard to operate at the senior level to participate in big decisions about the future of the company and the strategy if you don't understand the finances. So anything that you can do to build your financial skills is important. One way that I did that was through not-for-profit work, serving on boards. At one point, I currently am a finance chair for not-for-profit, but many years ago, when I was on the Red Cross board, I was chair of the audit committee. And I'm pretty sure that I was not going to be chairing the audit committee at USG, or a publicly traded company. But that was a great development experience for me. And, I had appropriate support so that I could do it competently. But sometimes you can work on whether it's financial skills or leadership skills or business skills, even outside the organization you're in, through not-for-profits or other organizations.
Yeah. I think that's really excellent advice. And then you also get to meet another group of executives, probably with different perspectives, different ways of doing business. And so early in your career, you got quite a reach upward, I guess, with a not-for-profit and by volunteering on that. Yep. I noticed, Jenny, that you also had that experience, right?
I was just saying, I think that's relevant for anyone in business who wants to land in the C-suite. And not-for-profit service really does open up, to Brian's point, opportunities to test out some skills that you wouldn't otherwise get to test. And it does develop relationships outside the company with people who, then can also provide perspective and become trusted advisors on other topics. So I've found serving on not-for-profits, I've served on a number through the years, and you start small, you do something local in your community that, nobody's really paying, I don't want to say not paying much attention to, but isn't, you're not going to immediately out of the gate, join the Red Cross. But you might have, local chapters of different things that are valuable, and you use that time valuably across the board. So.
And important networking. I mean, if you're going to be in Chicago and you're on some of these boards, I'm sure you meet some of the heavy hitters in the community.
Yeah. The Chicago business community really is 2 degrees of separation. Everybody knows everybody, or they know somebody who knows everybody. And it's a very unique community in that sense, in a really nice way.
Now, Brian, I know that you got an MBA with some emphasis in HR, but then you picked up a law degree later on. What would you say to people about that, a law degree along with your HR skills? Is that something necessary, or do you think that was just something that was nice, but?
Yeah, well, it was terrifically powerful for my career. And there's a surprisingly high number of HR people, CHROs, that have law degrees. Some of them were employment lawyers and came to the corporation that way. It's certainly not necessary. What it did for me was it sharpened my analytical and logical reasoning skills, I think. It helped me improve my writing skills. And so there are other ways to make that happen. A law degree is a big investment of time. It certainly did provide, I think, in some ways, credibility. And, so that was when I was dealing with either partners of the company or other executives, if I spoke about issues related to employment law or health and safety law, even though I wasn't an expert on that, it certainly gave me credibility and some gravitas. So it was terrifically helpful for me. It was kind of an unusual situation in that I went to law school at the company's request in preparation to run the labor relations function, which I did for a number of years.
I want to add, though, the power of strong communication skills and the power of the pen. And one of the things that Brian did really well for me was help me author the pre-board meeting letter that I send to the board of directors. And we had 6 board meetings a year. And the importance of being able to communicate very clearly, to step back and say, here's what's happening in the company. Here's what they need to know. Here's a good way to help communicate it. And my mother was an English teacher. I'm a decent writer. Brian and I together, hit on kind of a consistent voice and style. And the most important thing was balance. That, sometimes I would want to over-report certain news or under-report other news. And he and I worked together to really strike what's the right balance of what the board needs to hear from the CEO versus what's, more appropriate that you're sharing with employees. And that's a different voice and a different tone. So the power of that communication skill cannot be understated.
I worked for somebody many years ago who said, you can't write clearly if you haven't thought about this clearly. Mm-hmm. So the act of creating a document that's well thought out in itself it's not just, it is about communication, but it's also about thought process. And I tended to spend a lot of time, probably too much time, writing documents, and people who worked for me over the years. I think I got a little bit better at editing. I was a little bit, a little obsessed with it, but yeah. So HR people have to communicate well verbally, be able to stand up in front and manage change and get people to follow. But writing well is a terrific asset, both within the company, managing board relations, and for stuff you do outside the company.
Yeah, I know we often talk about presentation skills, but I've always thought that the writing skills are actually more difficult to achieve and vitally important, especially as you move up into the organization.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
good writing's hard work. I think, because communication today, whether it's, so much is done by remotely, and even texting is used in business a lot. But there is a time and a place for really thoughtful communications that require a lot of effort, and there's really no shortcut to the effort.
I write a blog every week to all 14,000 of our employees here at UL. And it takes a lot of work. But one of the things that I have written about is that importance of, simplicity and elegance in communications. But it's so hard to do it. And getting, boiling an idea down to its simplest elements in a way that can be communicated, to Brian's point, takes a lot of time. And I always love the quote, which is attributed to Mark Twain, but somebody said to me, he didn't actually say it first, which was, I didn't have time to write a short letter, so I'm writing you a long one. And think about that. The time it takes to write that short letter, to get your ideas down into the simplest, clearest elements is so important. And not falling prey, and I'll say Brian was really good at this, not falling prey to what I like to call the corporate buzzword bingo, of just throwing in, a word because it's the trendy word to say, as opposed to thinking about what's the real idea, what's the real word that actually could be meaningful to employees, rather than the lazy word because everybody's saying it right now.
Yeah. And I think your point of that you and Brian wrote together is the idea that having someone, especially for very important documents, that can take a look and be honest with you in terms of feedback. Which gets me to another question.
A lot of scribbles and red pens landing on my desks in the morning, which was great. And it makes you better as a CEO to have somebody willing to give you that feedback. Yeah,
no, that is exactly right. And I have a question here from Dwight Klein. I see HR professionals at all levels in their careers that struggle having honest conversation with upper management. What advice would Jenny and Brian share to those in HR who struggle with being assertive when they need to? Great question, I think.
I'll let you start, Brian, but I have my thoughts.
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes that comes from a lack of confidence. I think if you're confident in your opinion and your approach, and it's even if you have bad news to deliver, if it's a product of a thoughtful analysis, then you should be able to deliver that news. It's business news. It's not personal. And I think there is a time and a place for difficult conversations, and so I think you need to plan that out So, for instance, I talked earlier about, the HR person often is the one that has to give the CEO unpleasant news or speak the truth. That's maybe not in the middle of the company cafeteria. So you're thoughtful about where and when you have those difficult conversations, but you prepare yourself with facts and not emotion. And you just have to move forward. So I don't know that there's any secret to this, and I hope that answered the question, but at least those are my thoughts.
I was going to say, start with data and ground yourself in data. So as Brian said, what are the facts? But think about what you can point to as precedent as well. And this is a story from before I joined USG, and this wasn't an HR professional, but it was an employee who was in management. I was at a small boutique consulting firm. There were about 40 of us, and she felt very strongly that the partner for whom she'd been working was missing the mark. and, late in getting things reviewed and providing feedback and creating fire drills and, not necessarily, showing gratitude for people's hard work or giving credit for ideas. And so she sat down, she actually took the time on her own initiative and pulled up the position description, because we had position descriptions for everything, for the partner. And then she pulled up our core values and she wrote a very thoughtful memo. She wrote it out and then made an appointment with him to go and sat down with him and said, I can't believe I'm doing this. You're 3 levels above me, but I really think somebody needs to give you this feedback. And I've decided that it's me. And she made it grounded in data. It was non-emotional. It wasn't easy for him to hear. And to his credit, he stood up in front of the whole firm and commended her for doing that and took it to heart. And so that really taught me that if you're looking at precedent and sticking to facts and you do it in a non-emotional way, you should feel confident that the odds are the conversation should go reasonably well.
One of the common situations for HR people that can result in difficult conversations is saying no, right? And sometimes the HR department gets the rap of being the department of no, right? You can't do this, you can't do that. We have rules, we have policies, it's not fair, we're setting precedent, all that stuff, right? And a lot of times that's true. I think what I learned early in my career, and then I kind of relearned it working for a CEO I worked for before Jenny, was, even if you're confident the answer is no, that may not be the first word out of your mouth. And, HR is a sort of consulting process. So when faced with someone in upper management who wants to do something that can't be done or can't be done the way they want it to be done, then it's a little consulting is called for. Help me understand the big goal we're trying to achieve. Maybe we get there this way. Maybe we can't. Maybe there's another way we can get there. And, often there is a way to address the sort of overarching objective in a different way. And at the end of the day, when there's not, at least you are in a position that hopefully that you're viewed as having exhausted all the potential options, even if there ends up not being a workable one. So, again, don't necessarily start with, no, we can't do that.
Creating understanding sounds like what we're talking about, the baseline here.
Mhm.
And it's understanding on both sides. Let's see, I have another question. How have you aligned your leadership team to continually redefine your employee value proposition? And I guess the question I would have maybe is, what is the employee proposition today? And, as a CHRO or as a CEO, how do you try to align that?
I guess I'll start because I'm living this every day. We're in really challenging times. The combination of the lack of work-life balance that the pandemic put on everybody, and it doesn't matter if you were an essential worker in one of our labs here at UL and still had to come in every day following unique safety protocols, wearing masks and not, and social distancing from your colleagues, or if you were sitting at home on your computer screen every day. And I know plenty of people who literally would take phone calls hiding in their closet because they didn't have the space at home to have their own workspace, and their kids were at home for school, and it created tremendous stress. And so now we're coming out of that, and people's expectations have changed. There's a whole group of people who want to know why they can't work at home forever. There's a whole group of people who are really frustrated that they were the ones coming in every day and they haven't been recognized and rewarded appropriately. And then there's a whole group of people who are trying to figure out, what does this mean for me personally? Do I still want to do this job? Do I, what's my connection? So it's a very, very challenging time. And I know the question was, what's your employee value proposition? I think you have to ground it in, a couple of key pieces. We've, purported, as most companies do, we want to be an employer of choice for top talent. Well, again, you have to look at every single one of those words and what do they mean to you as a company? Employer of choice. We know that employees make choices every day and prospects make choices every day. So what are you doing to make them choose you? And the ones who keep working for you have made that choice, and the ones that you're recruiting are making that choice. So we're spending a lot more time thinking about, what is our recruiting brand? What is our retention efforts? What are we doing to ensure that that choice is made every single day? And then top talent, what's the definition of that? And how do you take your existing set of employees and make sure that they've got the right training and development so that they're staying as top talent? What are you doing with executive comp and total rewards and total comp to make sure that you've got packages that are attracting and retaining? And again, retaining is the key piece here, that top talent. And then what are you also doing to understand what really is going on in the market? Because there's a lot of hype and a lot of hyperbole out there. And then there's reality. And I think sticking with the data and understanding that, well, that was a good idea 6 months ago, but that's not really the way that the market is trending, is going to be important. So we're in really challenging times right now. And, we've got a lot of employees. And when I say we, this is a collective we, not just my company. But, we as a society around the world have a lot of very, frustrated people who are looking for the right leadership.
Ryan, do you have some thoughts about it?
Well, I think, I was just on a call for an organization I'm on the board of, going through some of the people issues and retention issues. And, certainly over the last couple of years with the turnover that's happened with many organizations, is working remotely. I think you call it the Great Resignation, which is the subject of an upcoming HR Insights. There is a lot of focus on where and how people work and how much they're paid. And that's important. You can't ignore that. I think, though, for most people, you can't get away from some of the fundamentals about why people work and where they work and what they want their work life to be, which gets to things like a feeling of belonging, harder in a virtual world, but I think that's still there for many people. Wanting to be engaged, wanting to feel like they're fully able to utilize their skills and abilities. And so I think employee engagement is as important, maybe more important today than ever was. I think there are some factors that are a little bit different today that impact that, but the fundamentals of how you treat people, having respect for their work, making them feel valued, making them feel a part of the larger. I don't think those have changed fundamentally. Even though with all this movement and turnover, it may feel like it has. I think that turnover will settle down at some point. And so I guess to sum it up, my point is the fundamentals about employee engagement and morale, I don't think have dramatically changed. I think they look a little different in this world, but and good HR people know how to manage those types of qualities in an organization.
Yep.
I'm curious, Jenny, what would you say percentage of your time is focused on people-related issues as opposed to technology, marketing, some of those kinds of things in terms of a CEO's job?
Boy, I hadn't really done the math. Having a strong head of HR minimizes, it makes sure that I don't over rotate, but we do quarterly talent reviews for each department, so that's, an hour for each one of my direct reports a quarter. And then a lot of the preparation for board meetings requires a lot of attention to thinking about the people issues. So it doesn't seem outsized balanced compared to other pieces. But I think that's the power of having a strong CHRO. Now, I will tell you one of the things that I really appreciate is, as I mentioned, I'll send a blog. I send a blog post every Monday to all 14,000 employees. And some of them I get 10 people responding, hey, thanks for that. Some of them fall completely flat, nobody cares. But every once in a while, I get somebody who responds with something that, they feel like they need to be heard. And, I used to believe that I needed to pick up the phone and make all those phone calls. And now what I've realized is that that's one of the powers of having that tight alignment and partnership with the head of HR, because I'll say like, hey, what do you think of this? And the response that I get is, I'm going to call them. And 10 minutes later, the conversation's been had, clarity has been achieved, and I didn't have to be the one getting involved in that.
I think one of the objectives of the senior HR person is to enable this. The CEOs have could work 24 hours a day and they would never get done everything that conceivably could get done. It's just the job just so big. So if you can help the CEO manage their time more efficiently, and when it comes to people issues, it's doing your homework, having the facts, having solutions, so that when you bring an issue forward, you've done your homework. You've done a thorough analysis so you can explain it thoroughly. You have maybe outlined some potential solutions, as opposed to just coming forward and saying, we have a big problem, let's sort through it, right? And I learned different CEOs I work for approach problems differently. Jenny is very data oriented, and really you need data to make decisions. So I learned, okay, what other information is going to be relevant to this discussion? Let me go get it now and bring it with me and not have to be sent away to look for it. So I think, the CHRO needs to spend a little bit of time planning how people issues are going to be addressed at the CEO level to make it more effective and to make it more efficient from a time standpoint.
Very good. Well, we're getting toward the end of the hour, but maybe one question to think about the future a little bit. I know that this retention has become a really big issue. It's a big issue right now, and everybody's sort of talking about it. And this idea that we're going to sort of come out of COVID, but maybe not really. It's going to be a new normal. I hate to use jargon like that, but where do you see the big HR issues right now that are going to need to be solved, as we move forward the next year or two? Where do you see the CHRO focusing a lot of attention?
When I step back and just think about our DEI initiatives, diversity, across the board, the sense of how do you grow the diversity of, people's profiles as well as diversity of thought. And on one hand, it's easier when people can work remotely and you can recruit from anywhere in the country, or in our case, anywhere in the world, to fill roles for those roles that are not lab-based, that don't need to be, in the office every single day. But that equity piece of, if somebody's sitting at home and they're not, I just got this question from an employee at a town hall today, and they're not paying for gas and they're not commuting and they don't need dry cleaning and all of that, are they going to get paid the same as somebody who's still, following a traditional office approach? Or, if I've got a tech person that I'm trying to recruit and I'm trying to get them out of Silicon Valley, and I pay them Silicon Valley rates, and then they decide, oh, hey, you know what? You're going to let me work anywhere. I'm going to move to Florida because there's no taxes and the cost of living's lower. And now I can have a great big house instead of what I had. Are you still going to pay Silicon Valley rates for somebody who's no longer sitting in Silicon Valley, even though they have that talent? So I think this equity piece is going to be one of the biggest struggles and opportunities for HR leaders to help us all work through.
Yeah, the whole fairness issue has certainly come front and center. In fact, I'm doing a little bit of work in the area, and we find that people even think about fairness differently. Men and women have a different notion of how they determine what's fair in terms of pay. We see that globally between different groups of people. And
well, and then you add in the new legislation in Colorado, and I think New York's about to pass it if they didn't, on what needs to be publicly reported around pay for open positions.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's that fairness is a great word in this.
Very so much so. Brian?
Yeah, I think, if we look at this in both in terms of challenges and opportunities, HR people are going to have to deal with all the challenges that we've talked about, some of which you just enumerated. But, in every difficult period or every period of challenge, there are opportunities. And so I think that HR people who will be successful in the next 5+ years will be the ones that see in this new world where not everybody comes to the office every day, for example. There's going to be opportunities for some companies to manage that better than others, to improve organizational performance better than others. And so I think that might be the real test of the HR people over the next 5-10 years is who figured out what the competitive advantages to the company could be by more quickly responding to these environmental events and using HR tools to address them, as a way to help the organization be more successful. There's opportunity in this for some companies that respond quicker and more effectively, whether it's work from home, whether it's COVID protocols, whether it's fairness. And I think, to build on where Jenny started with diversity, equity, and inclusion, there are companies that approach that as a regulatory or public relations initiative. There are others that see in it a talent management advantage. And I think that's where HR people can really shine.
Well, thank you both very much. I do appreciate it. Certainly, if there's any written questions that anybody might have, if they want to send it to me, I might try to follow up a little bit with both of you to get some answers. But again, we thank you very much. This has been a great session, and we look forward to seeing UL do wonderful things.
Thank you.
Okay, and so
Thanks
we'll.
for giving me a chance to spend time with Brian.
Yeah, good to see you.
I miss him.
Yeah, I was telling Brian earlier, it's good to see Chicago without snow. But on that note, goodbye all, and thank you for attending.